Speaker, let me begin on behalf of the Wellington MPs by welcoming everyone back to Wellington, where we've had a great summer. And I say this to the previous Speaker, Labour's rising star, that I was disappointed in that contribution because I don't think he listened to what the Prime Minister said, because the Prime Minister outlined policies today about building a stronger economy, building savings and investment, building exports, building skills and knowledge, building infrastructure for growth, reducing the cost of business and getting better results from the public service, an exciting vision. We're here to build a better New Zealand, to act on behalf of the people of New Zealand in a positive way. As usual, the Labour Party's stuck in the past: higher taxes, more regulation, less freedom. New Zealanders have heard it before and they don't like it. Mr. Speaker, a few days ago, Mr. Goff announced a reshuffle of his caucus, and it reminded me of what was once said of Harold Macmillan's cabinet reshuffle in 1962. Greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his friends for his life. To be fair, Phil Goff has shown us that he's got some intestinal fortitude, at least, in renewing his front bench, propelling Ruth Dyson from her lofty position at number 4 down to the infernal depths of number 5. And as I understand it, her poison tree is already working overtime. And it's great to see Mr. Jones in the chamber. Mr. Jones is back. And last year, Annette King said he'd have to work very hard to rebuild his reputation. And I think all Labour colleagues who were demoted or passed over for the shadow cabinet will agree with Phil Goff that no one has worked harder than Mr. Jones has over the last 6 months. So it's great to see him back. Mr. Jones was apparently one of the new generation of Maori leaders. The next day we learned that this new generation of Labour Maori leaders will also include Winston Peters, whom Labour hope to have on their team after the election. So let's face it, Mr. Speaker, this isn't rejuvenation. It's not even rebranding. It's an exercise in nostalgia. Mr. Goff's attempts to seize momentum this year have not been so much as back to the future, but full steam ahead to the past. Interestingly, Labour now has a grand total of 3 arts spokespeople as a result of its reshuffle, and I'm so delighted Mrs. Chadwick's still there leading this disparate team. If I knew their party was struggling to keep up that much, I would have offered to slow down. But there's just so much damage that needs to be fixed up as a result of the previous Labour Arts Minister. But I do have a bit of time to offer some advice to Mrs. Chadwick, to Ms. Hearn and to Mr. Robertson, and it's this. There's important policy work which this government is addressing. For many years the Arts Council's had a pretty ropey bureaucratic structure, and that's now being refined through legislation that we'll debate this year. And I'm very disappointed to hear that Mrs. Chadwick and the Labour Party are opposing it, because the artistic community want these changes. Last year the government managed to get some extra funding for the Historic Places Trust, which had been neglected for 9 years by Helen Clark. And we're now reviewing that legislation to make sure the structure is appropriate for the Crown entity, which the Historic Places Trust has now become. A very important area we worked on last year was saving the Hobbit. And I want to pay a particular tribute to the work of the Prime Minister and the Minister of Economic Development. Their work ensured that the Hobbit will stay in New Zealand, and it's going to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars, I say to Mrs. Chadwick, and it's going to create thousands of jobs. And I ask this: where was Annette King, the self-proclaimed MP for Weta Workshop, when the Labour Party's union friends were trying to destroy the Hobbit? Where was she when Sir Peter Jackson was being abused by her own colleagues? This is another issue I'm very much looking forward to debating on the hustings with Mrs. King in the marginal seat of Rongotai this year. I now want to turn I now want to turn to treaty negotiations, and I'm sorry Mr Parakura Horomia is not with us, because I want to express to him my very best wishes. He was out on the road with me on 17 December last year, first in Mohaka, when the Crown signed a deed of settlement with Ngāti Pahuera, and later that day at Murawai Marae, just south of Gisborne, when the Crown initialled an agreement with Ngāi Tumanuhiri. They were great occasions, and I really valued his being with me. Then on 22 December, the Crown signed a deed of settlement with Ngāti Porou here at Parliament. Again, Mr Horomia was present, he spoke, and I thank him for his support on these and other occasions, and I very much look forward to keeping him fully informed of treaty settlement work, because he, at least in the Labour Party, understands how important it is. Let me say something, Mr Speaker, about treaty settlements, because try as they might, the Labour Party can't escape the cold statistics. They only managed about 1.5 settlements per year in their last term of office. When visiting iwi, I've been told on more than one occasion that the last minister who spoke to them before me was Sir Douglas Graham, and I think that is a shocking record. Well, this government takes the matter seriously. Since the last election, we've achieved over 90 milestones, an average of 1 every 9 days. That includes 21 agreements in principle, 13 deeds of settlement. In just 2 years, we've achieved more than Labour did over 9 years. And so this is going to be a very busy time for settlement legislation in this House, and I know Mr Jones, who always makes a tremendous contribution in those debates, will be looking forward to those bills being debated. The Human Rights Commission noted the significant increase in treaty settlements and the benefits they bring to New Zealand. Last year was the most productive year in settlements history, exceeding the previous most productive year, 2009. Now, this is not the work of an individual. It's the work of a team. And in that context, I particularly mention my colleagues in the Maori Party. Their contribution to treaty settlements has been substantial. I thank them for the good work they've done, and I very much look forward to working with them again this year. So, Mr Speaker, the battle lines are drawn. The themes appear to be emerging. Does New Zealand want a forward-looking government addressing issues that matter to New Zealanders? Issues like growth, Mr Twyford, the importance of frontline services and developing our infrastructure? Or are they more interested in Mr Twyford's prescription of bureaucracy, of regulation, of waste and nanny knows all? Do they want a government that goes out and supports the creative industries like film, I say to Mrs Chadwick, or do they want a government that's beholden to the unions? Do they want a government that enthusiastically gets on with the hugely important job of achieving just and durable settlements with iwi? Or do they want a government that could only achieve 1.5 settlements a year? 1.5 settlements a year. Do they want an aspirational government led by principled, pragmatic and youthful leaders, or do they want a government of retreads from 30 years ago who have embraced every position on the political spectrum from far right to far left? Most of all, Mr Speaker, do they want a government which is up front with the people, doesn't play funny games with election dates, spells out a clear and articulate vision such as that outlined by our great Prime Minister this afternoon, and refuses to deal with people like Winston Peters? Or would they prefer a coalition of the absurd, Labour, the Greens, New Zealand First and Chris Carter? Enough said.